Move that over there. Got it. That's done. Okay, so now I need to add the extra thing. Bear with me in just a moment. Cards. And we'll show off the first one we were talking about earlier. Assault the Broken Blade. Should make that bigger. Okay. So, Assault the Broken Blade, I think, will be a fantastic card. Will be used quite often in Standard. And why do I think that? Because it's for 4 mana, a flying first strike lifelink. That's really good. 4/3 kind of doesn't matter at this point right now for health, because burn right now isn't really that amazing, which kind of sucks because I love burn. What are you going to do, right? And really, those stats are just amazing. Get her vigilance and you're good to go. And I really want to see that pop out of the creature. I mean, you can put like the sensor on her, the True Faith sensor. It'd be amazing. But anyway, let me talk about one more card here before we get into the Magic story, and then we'll start reading it. Sorry if it's a little bit late today. I had to get all the other things set up, and I had to redo the intro video because apparently I lost it. Let's see, what was spoiled today that I really liked? Got all this Emrakul stuff. Tree of Perdition. Oh, yeah. Gisa and Geralf. Geralf? Geralf. Gisa and Geralf. That's how you say it, right? Okay. That is a really good card. I think some self-mill is going to be happening here, and I really think that card is going to be super spicy for people who like to play Commander, right? I mean, you want to put all your zombies in your yard, mill yourself out. There's tons of ways to do that. There's a blue-black card, Glimpse the Unthinkable, does that, right? So you get all your zombies in your yard, bring them back, do some sort of dredge stuff maybe if you can. It just gets pretty awesome. That's I think this card is probably the coolest card released out of the cards today, and I'm a sucker for Legends. I mean, I have a Legend Rule YouTube, or Legend Rule segment on YouTube. So I mean, I like this type of stuff. I want to appreciate all the people that comes in and watches the Magic story. I like to read it to y'all. Let's see. I've already talked about the cards, so let's get on to the Magic story. Let me get to the scene set for you. Thanks to Nahiri's machinations, the Eldrazi Titan Emrakul has been unleashed on Innistrad. Meanwhile, Liliana Vess has been in a tower of Vess Manor, probing the powers and painful repercussions of the Chain Veil artifact. Ever since she quarreled with Jace, Liliana decided she can rely on only herself to face her demons. That's the beginning start to it. It's basically just saying, hey, Liliana's chilling out in in her castle, and she's ready to go out and actually do something instead of just sitting there in her castle. So give me just a second here. I will get to the next overlay going here. Switch it to the first in the line, which I do believe is, of course, the Chain Veil. So let me get into frame here so I can read while you're watching along with the items. Okay. Innistradz's Last Hope by Doug Beyer? Not entirely sure. Hopefully he will correct me at some point. Thin metal wires hung from the points of the Chain Veil. Liliana Vess could almost see her reflection in the spectral glass vessels where the wires led, and in the lattice work of the Witchbane orb on the windowsill, and in the conductive tubes that led out the window and up onto the roof. The etchings in her face were just visible through the veil. The lines in her skin matched the menacing light of the storm clouds outside. Lightning flickered appropriately. 2 demons still needed to die, but she had to make sure she wouldn't die herself when she managed to face them. The chain veil was a potent weapon, potentially deadly to its wielder. If this worked, she could use the veil safely. She wouldn't need help of some mind mage who persisted in chasing some wild mystery across the provinces, and she could rid the multiverse of her creditors, once and for all. "Are we ready?" Liliana asked. The others in the tower with her had not displayed a fraction of the smarts of Cloakboy, but they would have to suffice. The Geist mage Dirk listed items to himself in a micro-whisper as he adjusted a series of nozzles and tightened clamps on the orb. Dirk's assistant, Jared, stood at the window, his one big eye switching back and forth between the equipment and the lightning storm outside the tower. Jared held his hand on an appropriately sizable lever. "The collectors are raised, madam," the Geist mage said, "and the storm is reaching its peak. But I feel obligated to point out that we'll be coursing an enormous dose of spectral energy directly into the artifact." "You don't have to warn me," Liliana said. "Powered by the force of a lightning storm." "Yes." "While you are wearing it." "I know." "On your face." Liliana rolled her eyes. The flow of Geist energy through the orb will thus act as a kind of spectral antenna, shunting the object's counter-assault away from the subject, sublimating the backlash as harmless atmospheric static, circumventing all repercussions and thereby allowing free utilization of the artifact. Dirk glanced at Jared and tapped his mouth with gloved fingertips. That is the theory. "Look, Dirk," Liliana said, "my friend recommended you because she thought you knew something about spirit inhabitation. Do you, or don't you?" "Of course I do, madam," Dirk said, taken aback. Then let us proceed." Dirk adjusted the goggles over his eyes. "I should add, this will hurt." "Pain is temporary," said Liliana, sitting back in the chair. The wires dangled from the hanging points of the chain veil. "Besides, we learn nothing by testing this on Jared." Jared grinned. His larger eye shuddered for a moment like a reptile's. Dirk nodded to him, and he slammed down the big lever. The Witchbane orb hummed and dials flexed. Liliana could feel the links of the veil touching the curves of her face. "It's activated," Dirk said. "Now all we have to do is wait for a proximal bolt of lightning." Liliana's teeth clenched involuntarily as the surge came. Writhing lassos of energy bloomed on the wires leading from the roof collectors, and the spirits of the dead followed immediately. Geist shrieked through the tubes, filling the orb and the reinforced glass with electrospectral screams. A spray of sparks puffed from the equipment, but the circuit held. A blast of howling energy looped through the veil. Liliana could feel the weight of it lift from her cheeks slightly, its links floating against the force of gravity. She glanced at the others. Dirk had given up trying to adjust clamps and switches, and pressed his back to the wall, shielding his face with his arms. Jared reached a finger out toward a thrashing curl of energy, and recoiled when he touched it. Between them she could see her markings shining in the equipment, the etched diagram of her demonic contract forming a reflection halo around her. This is when Liliana felt most beautiful, when she was about to wield the power that made others afraid. She grasped the arms of the chair and called on the power of the veil. The backlash was immediate and total. The thousands of souls that resided in the veil filled her with power, but the power was coupled with pain, and the pain was blinding venom. Inextricable from the magic it afforded, the Geist circuit had not drawn off any of the backlash. Beakers popped and the collectors blew out. "I'm ending it," Dirk said, reaching for the lever. "No," said Liliana, her voice a dagger. Dirk retracted his hand. The room shook. Liliana grasped the chair, trying to hold the room still, trying to hold in the scream that wanted desperately to get out, trying to see anything but the pain. Pain is temporary. When she couldn't contain it anymore, she cried out. Fuses blew and the tower went dark. The spectral howling ebbed away, until Liliana only heard her own exhausted breaths. Jared struck a match and lit a lantern. The lab was a disaster zone. The equipment was ruined. Raindrops plashed on the windowsill. Liliana unclasped the chain veil and slid it off her head. Blood seeped from her etchings. "I mentioned the risks, madam," Dirk said. She glared at him, imagining the Geist Mage skin withering away and his skeleton jawing the words, "I'm sorry." Instead, she nodded her head toward the door. "You may see yourself out. Deliver the orb back to its owner." A boom of residual thunder was her punctuation. Dirk quickly collected the spent Witchbane orb and a few other items into his bag and left. The echoes of his footsteps receded down the spiral stairs. Jared gently pushed aside a pile of broken glass with his foot, but did not leave. Liliana stowed the chainmail in a skirt pocket. Innistrad's best and brightest hadn't been of any help. Tomes and grimoires of spectral remedies sat askew. Not even Lilivia's premier Geist expert had been able to tame the veil. Liliana looked out the window at the storm that boomed over the countryside of Stensia, daubing at her skinwards with a handkerchief. In the gloom, Thraben glowed like a distant candle. She loathed relying on someone else. But it wasn't that she needed a cloak boy, she told herself. It was merely that she needed people to need her. So she had some warm bodies to stand between her and a couple of self-important demon lords. If only he could owe her somehow. From downstairs came a man's scream. A snarling scuffle and a crash followed. Liliana tossed her crimson-dotted handkerchief aside and spiraled down the stairs. She heard and smelled them before she saw them. Their guttural snarls and their slobbering, hungry whines, the reek of damp fur over the reek of blood. Okay, I'm going to switch the image here and take a quick break. I've got to get some water in me, because keeping yourself hydrated when you read any story is always a good thing. What do I think about the story so far? Well, it's pretty interesting. I really like, excuse me. I really like the view from Liliana of what's going on in Innistrad, like her thoughts about what's going on. Especially like way she just kind of just resides in her own place and just chills out and just doesn't even care about anyone else is wholly black in nature. Like in terms of color wise, but yeah, I think it's actually a really good story so far, and it's about to go someplace quite interesting. If you don't mind, I like it when other lore characters interact with other lore characters, and when they've been separated or haven't really had any contact with them for a while, and things have changed. That's really interesting to me because that shows growth for characters. And that shows that you can see what exactly happened between these two characters. Okay. Let us continue. Werewolves. Liliana's entire throne room was overrun. And they looked not sick, exactly, but warped, as if their flesh and bones had been putty in the hands of some unnatural mutating force. Their extremities bent in odd ways, folding and crinkling like mats of kelp. But they were still werewolves, and they still had claws. Dirk lay on the floor, his chest raked open. The contents of his bag and his ribcage were both spilled out over the floor. His face was pale, locked in a stare of surprise, and he was exhaling his last breath like a flattening balloon. The werewolves turned to Liliana, sniffing. One of them roared, and it had eyes where its tongue should be. A suite of spells, deadly ones, each tailored to one of the werewolves in front of her. That's what this called for. Just enough power to dispense with each one, for just enough of them to clear a path to the door of the manor. Jared, Liliana shouted over her shoulder, "Get your coat!" The chain veil did not budge from her pocket. Hours later, the storm had subsided, and the countryside of Stensia had become a twisted zoo. Liliana noted that every passerby had something reshaped about them. The bodies of roving vampires had the wrong silhouettes, always with too few of something or too many. Anatomically improbable travelers raved prophecies of stone and sea at them as they staggered in diagonals. Finally, Liliana, Jared, and, haltingly, Dirk arrived at the monumental door. Lurenbrom fortress soared above them, a stark cliff with a citadel that protruded directly from the rock face. Higher up, the utilitarian architecture softened and elongated into tiers of ornate leaded windows, each one with its own floating chandelier of twinkling candles. In many of the windows, vampires peered down at them, wearing gleaming ancestral armor. Liliana gestured for Jared to knock. Jared gawked at the door's height. "You really know the lady of the house?" he asked. Dirk, for his part, made a gurgling noise. The man's neck was broken, so his head rested at a weird angle and his throat looked lumpy. But at least his legs had gotten him here, and at least his arms had been capable of carrying the spent witchbane orb. Jared's long coat was strapped tight around Dirk's midsection, doing its best to hold the remainder of the dead man's insides in. Liliana raised her hand slightly, and Dirk squared his shoulders, but his head still dangled to one side. The desiccated tongue wouldn't stay completely inside his mouth, contributing to the gurgle. Liliana shrugged. "I make it my business to know those who wield power," Liliana said. "As does she." Jared banged on the door and stood back. The door opened, and an imposing woman in an ornate gown, or possibly an ornate woman in an imposing gown, appeared. She held forth a priest's staff that radiated like hot embers in Liliana's face. "She is not receiving human visitors," said the woman, flashing her fangs as she spoke. Her irises were black pits that seemed to smolder. "I'm returning something that belongs to her," said Liliana. The woman paused, visually inspecting Dirk and the spanked witchbane orb he carried. "Leave it here, then be gone from this estate before I call invocation down upon you." Jared made a movement to confront the vampiric priest, but Liliana stopped him with a touch. In a citadel full of vampires, one did not fight when there was still a chance to cajole. "I'd speak with Olivia directly, please. Tell her Liliana Vess would see her." "I told you she's not receiving mortals." "Mortals! Bless your bloodless heart." The vampire priest held her staff high, the jagged symbol at the tip warping the air with heat. "Oh, Liliana, my dear one." Olivia Voldaren appeared in the door suddenly, dismissing the priest with a brief but vicious hiss. The priest stood to one side, bowing her head, but following Liliana with her eyes. Olivia was glorious in black segmented armor. As usual, her feet didn't touch the floor. "Have you come to celebrate the good news?" she asked, ushering in her guests. "Come, come." "Just returning your orb," said Liliana, "and your Geist Mage, and hoping you might know the whereabouts of an acquaintance of mine." She smiled pleasantly at the priest as she passed by. "What exactly are we celebrating?" Olivia took Liliana's arm, floating next to her and drawing her deeper into the citadel. "Why, the long wait is over! Haven't you heard?" They entered a broad gallery where elegant vampires stood or hovered at every staircase, every landing. Hundreds of eyes watched Liliana and her attendants as Olivia led them to the lower halls of the fortress. Every vampire that had ever held the name Voldaren seemed to be in the building, glowering in unison. Liliana made a furtive motion with one hand. The corpse of Dirk the Geist Mage dragged itself over to an antique gilded chair, slumped into it, and went limp with the orb in its lap. The coat around its middle squished, holding its contents as best it could. Olivia leaned over conspiratorially, squeezing Liliana's arm. "It's the Archangel! Poof!" she cackled. "A smear on the floor of Thraben Cathedral. Oh, but it's simply too good." "Avacyn is dead?" A small thought of Jace descended on her, like a moth landing in her hair. He had been on Avacyn's trail when they last spoke. Olivia made an expansive sweep with her arm. "We of the night can rejoice, for the world is ours again." "I was quite cross when I had heard that you had been freed from her little trap." Liliana raised her eyebrows a millimeter. "But Soren has come to his senses and put down that thing of his. And now I must say it's all worked out rather well, hasn't it?" Olivia laughed. She led Liliana on, through gallery after gallery. Jared disappeared into the maze. Liliana kept up with Olivia, and now you're raising an army. "Well, my dear, it turns out that whoever opened the Hell Vault..." Liliana kept her face correctly polite. set loose more than just the Archangel, Olivia continued, and more than just those demon friends of yours. They released that other one as well. Drink? She signaled to a nearby vampire. You there, bring our guest a drink. A vampire pushed a glass of wine into Liliana's hand, actual wine, and clanked away in his suit of ornate ancestral armor. It was Liliana herself, of course, who had caused the Hellvault to break open and spill its contents all over Innistrad. She had slain the demon Gristlebrand, and the other consequences of its opening were of no importance to her. She hadn't seen any reason to let her vampire social acquaintances know any of this. And she seems quite miffed now that she's free, Olivia went on. Can't say that I blame her. As I said, I was cross before, but now I should adore to know who set them all free, just to express my utter gratitude. Lila didn't know who else might have escaped the Hellvault who was so important to Olivia, but she had an intuition it was connected to the changes she had seen all around Innistrad, the warped werewolves in her manor, the countryside of twisted vampires and raving doomsayers. This was the kind of thing that fascinated Cloakboy. Liliana just wanted some demons to die, but maybe the two could be linked after all. They emerged into a broad, thickly carpeted drawing room. A tall, white-haired vampire in a long jacket stood with his back to them, looking out the tall windows into the night. Liliana felt claws dig into her arm. We know it was you, Olivia hissed, suddenly hovering just by her ear. We know you freed them, she added brightly. Isn't that right, Soren? Soren Markov turned around to face them. He wore hatred like a flamboyant suit. Pause here for a moment, take some more drink, relax. Story's getting pretty good. Soren just entered. You know it's always good when Soren shows up. He does a lot of crazy stuff. Take a look at social media and stuff like that. Sure things going. It's going. Okay, yes, see. Yes, the story is really good so far, and with Soren showing up, that's actually really fun. Okay, so let us continue with the story. Soren had just entered. I mean, he was already there, he just turned around, really. You, he said. Look who's paid us a visit, Olivia said, her voice all dainty politeness once again. Soren, I believe you know Liliana Vess. You did this, said Soren. You released the Lithomancer and brought this upon us. Liliana wrenched her arm away from Olivia and gathered herself. She walked up to Soren and looked him up and down. Finally she chuckled, picking a mote of dust off of Soren's lapel. I had business to attend to, she said. Not my fault if your closet was full of skeletons. You had no right, Soren said, each word like a blade on a whetstone. Soren, You and I have another matter to attend to, said Olivia, floating around them, but I'd be remiss if I didn't allow you two the opportunity to catch up, wouldn't I? Soren brought his face close to Liliana's. All of this is because of you. The Lithomancer is free, and now we must face her. You have quite the vampiric army assembled, Liliana said. She smirked at him. Or, let me guess, is it more of a defense force? You slighted her, didn't you? Soren's flanks flared. I told you when you came here as a pup. Innistrad is mine. You meddle in my affairs, you die. Liliana looked him in the eye, her fingers reaching down to touch the rings of the chain veil at her waist. The etchings began to glow on her skin, and her hair floated slightly. Innistrad may be your domain, Soren, she whispered. She patted him on the arm. But death is mine. But Soren snarled, whipping his arm away and pressing his forehead into hers. His eyes snapped just briefly to her neck. Now, my friends, Olivia laughed lightly, patting herself between them, as giddy as I'd be to see you tear each other apart, all over my drawing room. Soren, it looks like the time has come. Join me outside. Nahiri awaits. She gestured toward the tall windows into the night. Liliana was struck by what she saw through the glass. What had been the remnants of the lightning storm was now a swollen cluster of clouds churning over the coast of Nephalia. Tendrils of mist reached out in all directions. It was not just a few werewolves or vampires that were being warped. Whatever force had arrived, it threatened to tear apart all of Innistrad. Olivia slid a sword from its sheath. Liliana, dear one, I'm afraid you've exhausted my supply of Geist experts and spectral toys. But perhaps you'd like to join us. You were the one who released Nahiri after all. She may even want to thank you. Liliana just watched the clouds. This was deep, ancient magic, world-altering and vindictive. She caused this? The petty act of a petty mage, Soren murmured, with a misguided sense of justice. So it was you who caused all this, Liliana said. You wronged her. And now we're off to wrong her again, Olivia said with a fanged grin. Framed in the windows of the fortress, the atmospheric mass shifted slowly from its origin over the Nephalia coast, tipping toward Gavany province in the brightly lit high city. The sky seemed wrinkled and torn, and Liliana thought like those werewolves. It was as if the whole plain, the whole of Soren's homeworld, had been tainted on purpose, warped from horizon to horizon, just because Soren cared about it. Whoever Nahiri was, Liliana had to admit, she didn't do things halfway. Aren't you the least bit concerned about what her vengeance is doing to Innistrad? Liliana asked. Jace is... She straightened herself. There are thousands of people out there. This world is ruined, Soren said. She has made sure of that, and your Jace will die at Thraben with the rest of them. What Soren means, Olivia said brightly, is that stopping Nahiri will surely stop the unpleasantness she has wrought. We're on a heroic mission. Liliana glanced outside, then looked back at Olivia, now with a dreadful tenderness. Oh, you sweet child. Soren slid his sword out of its scabbard lazily like an afterthought. Let's go, Olivia. He turned and stalked out of the drawing room and out of the mansion without another word. Olivia floated after him, and ranks of Voldaran vampires followed after, their armor echoing through the halls. Liliana followed them out. As she saw Jared again, she said, Jared, get your coat. Jared looked sadly at his coat and began the task of extricating it from Deer. Quick break here to take a quick drink. Almost to the end of the story. This is where Soren and Olivia march off to go fight Nahiri. That stuff will be saved for later on a different story, presumably, so we won't see that. But I appreciate any of you who have stopped by to listen to the story. Of course, this can be seen every Wednesday on Riptide Pro Labs Twitch channel, 9 p.m. Eastern, whichever time that is for you, if you're EU or Asian or anywhere, really. You can remember to stop by at that time. Just calculate it through your GMT calculator and stop on by. Really appreciate it. Even if you pop in for just a little bit, that's great. Giving me extra views to the channel just helps me out a lot on the Twitch channel. Anyway, let us get back to the story. They emerged out into the night. The wind howled now, great cones of suction thrashing the sky. A ruddy, otherworldly glow floated among the distended bellies of the clouds. Liliana pushed her hair out of her face as it whipped side to side. She looked toward the distant hills of Gavany as great shadows coalesced over it. This is what Jace is trying to stop, she thought. Soren barely glanced back over his shoulder as he and the vampires assembled. Soren pointed with his sword. Come, Olivia, he intoned over the wind. It's time for you to fulfill your end of the bargain. Olivia smiled gaily and swept into the air. The vampire army marched off down the hill, swords and pikes and red-hot priest symbols held high, off into the mists, off to battle Nehiri. Not to battle the horrors that Nehiri had wrought upon this world, not to help out of his mind Jace. This world was destined to die, then, Liliana thought. Its protectors had all forsaken it. It was time to say goodbye. Goodbye, this manor. The sky uttered an unfathomable sound that shook Liliana's bones. In the distance, Thraben glittered like a falling star resting on the horizon. Goodbye, Cloak Boy. But she found herself walking down the hill, on a different path from the vampires. She found herself on the road. She found herself passing a new scrap, where the criminals lay in their graves, waiting out the eternal part of their sentence. She found herself reaching out. Corpses crawled up out of the earth. She kept walking. The corpses followed her. She found herself passing another cemetery, and another. A little roadside shrine, a cursed iron-fenced diagram, a mausoleum of honored Cathar dead. Each time she reached out. Each time the dead obeyed her, wriggling themselves free from the rest and lurching along behind her. As she walked in the direction of Thraben, she reached down to her waist. She could almost hear the scores of spectral essences sneering at her, chanting at her from within the chain veil, over the sound of the zombies dutifully lurching and foot-dragging their way down the road behind her. Soren and Olivia weren't going to do anything about the crisis Nehiri had caused. And the only person she could count on to understand, he and his broken, irritating, fathomless brain, was following his curiosity directly into messy, twisted, and almost certainly inevitable death. It wasn't that she needed him. It was simply that she needed someone to need her. Well, Jared, she said loudly into the wind. She raised her arms, feeling the etchings like hot blood vessels in her skin. Looks as though I'm... A dozen more zombies lurched out of the ground, compelled to follow in her wake of necromantic power. This world's... The corpses did not seem warped, at least no more warped than their disheveled bones had already become by the years in the ground. The restless dead seemed to shrug off the effects. Liliana smirked. Last hope. Obviously that's the same thing, so I'll just turn that off. Yeah, so that's the story. Liliana decides to go, hey, well, I'm going to raise up all the zombies and we're going to attack. We're going to go save the Gatewatch, because what's going to happen is the Gatewatch is going to show up. They're going to get attacked by Eldrazi menaces. Liliana's going to show up, and they're going to see, like, these zombies are just going to eat and kill the hell out of all the Eldrazi. And they're going to be like, well, damn. Like, what? And they're going to see it's Liliana, and they'll be like, Liliana, I thought you didn't care. Jace will be like, I really thought you didn't care. And she'll be like, well, I care enough to save you so you can be indebted to me later. But regardless, it seems that only the dead on this plane are not affected by Emrakul, which is perfect. I mean, it's a perfect setup. If Emrakul affects the living, then the dead have no consequence to it. And that's where Liliana works. Her magic goes into the dead, and we've got zombies everywhere. So, I mean, she'll send torrents upon torrents of zombies to them, and that'll be it. Anyway, I'm going to have to cut the stream short. I can't do any Magic Sealed right now. I have to contend with some other stuff. But more videos tomorrow. YouTube. Thanks everybody for watching who came to watch. I will be back, of course, next week to read the story. And I hope you all appreciated it. You can always watch all my stories as our Twitch VODs on this channel. And I'll see you guys later.